My name is Ruslan Shtyk. So I'm coming from a company called Smartling, and I already know that some of you know Smartling, what Smartling is. So I'm going to explain how it works a little bit. And so Smartling's mission is to make translation easy, and it has been pretty effective this far. Smartling has been around in the industry for a decade, and effectively named as a market leader by Common Advisor Research. This is an industry-leading analyst firm. Pretty much, Smartling has created this category of cloud translation. This company is headquartered in New York City, the city of skyscrapers, Statue of Liberty, crowds, a lot of people, and people who consume 7 times more coffee than in any other state in US. I joined Smartling back in 2013 as a software engineer, and I've been working on a variety of projects and ultimately landed on projects related to the visual context. So Smartling is pretty dedicated to the context, so they have the whole team working on that and evolving and building solutions for the context, particularly visual context. We'll see how Smartling actually works and why context is very important. So we'll quickly describe how Smartling works, and also like different parts of Smartling without any particular details. But later we concentrate on the actual very specific topic of the visual context. We'll describe how context is getting so important as a quality tool during translation process and during the whole localization process in general, as well as how does it impact costs and how context help to optimize them. We'll also look at contextualization challenges like that we face in our daily operations in Smartling, and why it's very complex to actually get the particular good visual context for translators in a CAT tool. And we'll explain what types of context are supported by Smartling, and how we deal with getting the context in the system, enriching it, presenting it for our translators, and updating. So let's begin. And ultimately, we're going to end with a Q&A session. So yeah, so Smartling is essentially is a cloud TMS. That's pretty quick and a very short expression that describes what Smartling does. As already mentioned, Smartling is all-in-one, essentially. So this is the tool where you both manage your content and translate your content. And depending on your role, you work with the different products of Smartling. So what this means, Smartling enables organizations to both manage and translate content on global scale, all while automating the process to reduce the time and costs. This content can be anything from web pages to Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, application resources files like technical file formats like JSON, properties, get text, and so on. And it can also translate mobile applications and video subtitles. Smartling platform aspects would include some tools to automate the translation process, the features to automate marketing practices, computer-assisted machine translation tools, centralized multilingual content management, and reporting to analyze translation quality. So automate and integrate, one of the aspects that's very important to the whole Smartling differentiation strategy. For example, Smartling is capable of integrating with just about any platform on the market where the content is created by introducing so-called connectors. So connectors are standalone products that can be embedded in the content management system and they help to integrate the translation process directly from the content management system. That helps to reduce the time, to reduce the costs, and especially important for people who actually used to work with only one particular CMS and got expert in it, without introducing them to Smartling interface. Connectors are very efficient, and Smartling has a handful of them, actually a lot more than that. And for systems like Contentful, Drupal, Marketo, all familiar, I guess, etc. So that integration includes also like automatic content update and uploading the translated content directly back to CMS. Also, Smartling is able to deliver data through API. So customers able to build pretty much any solution that would include transfer of the content and context between different systems. So pretty much there was a question earlier whether it's possible to actually integrate some other CAD tool with Smartling. It is possible. Smartling is API first SaaS solution. Pretty much all the functionality that is built through API. So the other aspect is manage content and optimize efficiency. So some of the major management features within Smartling would include like the global view of all translations with real-time progress. You can also manage your tasks, jobs, delegate them to teams, manage and assign projects, view upfront costs, and many more. So the other aspect is that Smartling provides this supercharged translation tool. This is a very schematic view of how Smartling CAD tool looks like. What you actually can see is that this area over here, this is where the context appears. That's what we're gonna talk about a lot today. This is where the actual translation happening. So as you can see, this view shows you that once you translate in context, you will see the result right away in the context. So this panel actually is a system panel where you have access to linguistic assets such as translation memory, glossaries, style guides, and so on, and like some powerful editing tools. Also, you can run quality checks and make a concordant searches within translation memory. So the CAD tool kind of integration point for translators, but this is just one of the products that Smartling provides to leverage the beauty of the SaaS solution. So upon logging to Smartling, translators will immediately gain access to their jobs. Assigned jobs can begin translating strings. Oh, strings. That's an interesting concept. So the string is a unit of the content within Smartling. So pretty much any content that's been ingested by any of available means is extracted as strings. So strings can be either paragraph of text to a particular sentence. If it is a paragraph of text, the string is then further segmented by the sentence and represented as multiple segments. Another very important aspect of the SmartLink platform is analyzing quality and improving. So with deep insights into not only what your translators are doing, but also how the entire platform is working to facilitate the content translation, so organizations can drastically improve the quality. There is a built-in engine that is based on machine learning that's analyzing every completed job and builds this so-called quality confidence score. This is the rating of your job in a confidence, how high quality it is. Depending on the number of data points and number of these sections, this score actually tells you whether your translation is production ready, essentially. So it's always evolving based on how many translations we actually have, how many data we put into the system, as we are seeing early in presentations, that machine learning works like feeding the large data sets. And So this image just shows that depending on how many quality check errors you get, right? You get a increased score or decreased score. If you don't have any context, that is very big impact to your quality. And this is something we're going to talk about in general. So the visual context essentially is a quality metrics that it's very important to overall quality of translated content. So customers can pinpoint and explain bottlenecks, and more importantly, make adjustments to the workflow to improve translation outcomes. So we also provide like reporting and workflow analysis that, for example, can show the content is unchanged in internal review step, and despite taking 20 days essentially for the content to advance in the workflow. So it's very important to actually have this data available for you to analyze and iterate. So now we talk why we need to translate in the context. So yeah, as you can see, there are a few examples that can be translated in completely different context and can have completely different meaning. The quality translation is not only correct, but also it's appropriate in the given context. Some word and expression ambiguity is resolved with the context. Translation obviously is easier to up to date with the local specifics. And I learned a lot today by attending some other presentations where there's a vision that's definitely reinforces our motivation and our idea that human translation is something that it's going to be a much more expected and much more sophisticated in the future. So machine translation can provide a basic, a basic translation, and it pretty much always needs a human intervention to actually correct translation based on the context. And machine translation doesn't need context. It doesn't know how to work with context. It doesn't need a visual representation of what it's translating. While human translation obviously needs the context, because based on these examples, it can be very, very weird outcomes. Also, without context, translators often have to do extensive research to ascertain the source text author's intended meaning. In the case of website translation or mobile app localization and other types of digital content, context is essentially imperative. While it might be tempting to think that translators always receive all the necessary tools, it turns out companies are not very eager to provide the context. Why? Because they think the context is neither sufficient nor a required condition to complete the quality translation, and this is like a big mistake. We believe the context is essential to a translation, to a special localization. The localization goes beyond translation, obviously, and this is very essential information that every translator has to have. Take, for example, the English language, which is such a rich in polysemy or diversity of meaning. So many common words are so popular just because they're versatile. For example, word run, right? One can run a business or a marathon, run into the old friend or run out of time, and stocklings always run, and you can run for the president, So this simple ambiguity example shows how it can be hard to get the right translation for the same expressions in different cases. Now, let's take a look at context as a cost optimization tool. It's a very simple image. It just shows that context also helps to identify potential errors and prevent retranslation of the content. So in this picture, these red arrows indicate essentially issues that might appear very late in the localization process when internal reviewer actually identifies that translation is incorrect and it doesn't make sense, especially when it's legal review. Early presentations we're talking about how legal translation makes it makes legal binding to the words it's saying. So it's very important to have an internal legal review for any legal content you have. And what it means is that the whole process should start again, should start over and over. Translator should retranslate the content, reviewer should take a look again, and provide some information and feedback about the general correctness of the issues, and legal review should review the content again. And if number of such iterations is high, all the costs associated with getting localized content ready to the due date may rise dramatically. It takes much more time to have content read properly without having a visual context at hand. It's almost impossible to understand what does it mean. And reviewer's job is typically paid by hour. Moreover, multiple retranslations slow down the overall project delivery, as we all know. So now we understand why context is important. We'll take a look at what does it mean to contextualize the content. So what is contextualization? So the goal of the contextualization is to provide 100% coverage for the content you have in the system. And it's not just a context. We need a good context. So the good context is context that helps translation process rather than distracts translator from the actual content meaning. So, for example, like static content in the form of PowerPoint presentation or Microsoft Word document is pretty obvious. They already have the context in the form of the document itself. And it's the context and the content are always in sync, since the context of such document always comes with the content. And if we take a regular web page, we can take the whole web page as a context. And that's also in sync, because when we extract string from that context, the string source, anything that's around the actual focus, becomes the context. Well, on the contrary, like if you have a highly dynamic website with many transient states and responsive design, the capturing the context becomes very difficult, because some of the information is hidden, some of the information is not revealed until you click a button, or you scroll down, you perform a particular action to reveal the content. So capturing those states are very cumbersome, and we need some more sophisticated tools rather than just to upload the single file and treat it as a context for the content. Well, depending on whether the customer has prior localization experience, it may be already possible to integrate one of the context solutions in the form of connectors, for example, with CMS, that would handle contextualization out of the box. So also, one more challenge, and actually two more challenges. One of them actually I didn't think about to present here, but it's very important to keep the content that is in the context secure. When customers saying, I have a lot of sensitive information in my context, right? I don't want to expose social security numbers, or I don't want to expose credit card numbers in my context. What can you do to prevent that context appear in front of translators in the end? And Smartling provides some tools to do that as well, to actually filter the particular content from the context. So also the other challenge is obviously, like, if customer is running any active development during localization, the context always changes, because the final product is going to change. So, and we have to provide the tools to update the context on the fly, and especially when we implement integrated context solution with the connectors. So these images just display, like, I'll explain what it means. This is the bare content without context. This is the process of contextualization. This is contextualized content. So this image is going to be present in the future slides. Now, what is this? So this is so-called primary context. The primary context essentially is a string source. Just what I mentioned, can be web page, can be PowerPoint document, it can be something that is already provides us with the context for the strings we ingest. So this is weird image is a secondary context. For example, you have a properties file, Java properties file, or JSON file. Some of the technical file formats that appear during, during localization process within the companies that have to deal with the, very early externalization procedure where they start building their application, already thinking about localizing it. So what they do, they extract all the content into a certain file formats that is suitable for localization, like gettext format, like JSON format, Java properties as I mentioned, .NET ResX, and others. And when this content is being ingested into Smartling, it doesn't have any context. It doesn't have anything. It's just a bare content, bare strings, probably with some particular instructions or directives that are supported by content ingestion tools. And providing context for this content is pretty challenging, and it includes using one of the available tools that provides a secondary context, so-called. So there is no primary context, we provide a secondary context. Also, customer may use so-called contextualization environment, where customer may set up a specific, for example, website where customer is going to use tools to provide the secondary context, and Smartling provides such tools. There's also external context that can be submitted at any time using the very low-level API. It's not low-level, it's low-level because it requires developer development experience for the company to actually provide such context. But such context is also possible to add, and there are additional challenges for that. I'll explain that later. So, one of the challenges. Different context sources may provide different results based on what context type is requested. It's like a web page, image, or a video. It depends number of factors, whether like Smartling environment may access the original context source to actually provide or request all the associated resources. So the first example, which is the good context, this one, actually provides the best possible context, because what you see is an exact representation of the production web page. It's submitted, for example, by one of the tools called Chrome extension. You just like have a Chrome browser extension, you click, it captures the HTML context, and it sends it to Smartling. And it doesn't send any like screenshot or image. It is actual HTML that's been presented in front of translators. And this tool bundles all the resources of the web page into a single file and uploads that file to Smartling. And when the context is opened in a CAD tool, it already has all necessary resources to render correctly. So that's why it looks pretty good. The second example, this one. So it's an uploaded web page that's saved as a file, from the browser, from internet. So strings are already found within this context, and there is no need to run so-called context matching that I'll explain later what it is. Actually, I can explain right now. So when you provide the secondary context, the strings that are already in the system should be found within the context. So the strings are set to be bound to the context. This way, when translators open the CAD tool and open the list of strings from the job, they know which context to show. So the strings in a different strings in the same job may have different contexts. They may represent different screens on the web page. They may represent different transient states and all this. So in this case, when we upload just HTML page, we treat the context as a primary context, which means we extract all the strings from the context, and everything around the strings becomes the context for them. But the problem is, this context is bad. It doesn't really it doesn't really show you the production looking web page, and it doesn't really help you much because while you found strings here, they turn out to be invisible. They turn out to be shown only when particular CSS is applied, only when particular styling is applied. So, and that creates additional challenge of how would we get such resources? How would we get all the necessary styles and scripts to run to actually reveal the content? And the third example, this one, it's this very similar to second one. The difference is it shows web page context that may render in the cat tool without resources because SmartLink cannot access them. For example, it was captured from a contextualization environment that was private at the time that customer was working with it. And here our strings are visible, our imaginary strings are visible, but the problem is translator has no idea whether the translation is gonna fit into the space. For example, right here, right? Because the context is broken again. Some scripts were not able to run, and some CSS were not able to be applied, and it doesn't really help. It doesn't really help to provide the quality translation, which has a great impact on the overall quality in general. So in many cases, also achieving 100% coverage for such contexts is pretty complicated. As I mentioned earlier, there are multiple issues may happen with the actual the content and the context matching. So first of all, obviously the content is not visible in a pop-up. You have to invoke the pop-up to actually capture the context for that content, or the content that may be hidden by a scroll bar right here. You only have to scroll all the way down to reveal the particular content and then capture it. And the content that is a dynamic and represented by a string with placeholders that is supported by Smartling as well. So all those are pretty hard to get, and especially when newer web applications, we're dealing with the customers that use all kind of front-end frameworks to build, flowing interactive experiences, allowing users to hide and reveal content. They are responding to screen sizes. They may be visible on a desktop, but they're not visible in their mobile experience. And this paradigm of building application produces such a large number of these trends and application states, many of which are only visible in a combination of user actions and application responses to these actions. So dynamic content may be updated by application itself. You would never know how to actually translate that one, and it's obviously challenging. In the case of the image, Smartling supports optical character recognition, so it's able to identify strings in the image. But there are additional challenges related to that appear because strings may be so small that OCR engine would not be able to capture those, and resolution may be very small. The image might be blurred, and so on and so on. So we have to iterate on that with the customer to actually provide a better context. Now we show that. Now we look at particular use cases. So say we have web pages, right? So we have a website that we have to translate. In the case when you're using one of the Smartling products called like Global Delivery Network, which is essentially a web proxy. It's a system where you have a preliminary setup of your website actually talking to Smartling website, and Smartling website returns the translated content back through the reverse proxy. In this case, the user who's visiting your website actually goes to Smartling website, and Smartling environment actually gets the original content, extracts the strings from it, and puts everything that's around strings into the context. So this context is so-called primary, and it's available right away. It delivers 100% coverage. It's also dynamic. We can tell by the particular rule engine that whatever you ingest from the website always ingest a new context, and strings will, while your website evolves, context also evolves. So it's very simple example, but this product is pretty expensive. And so, oh yeah, my notes are all over the place. No, thanks so much. That's okay. So in the case of a customer using mobile application, for example, on iOS or Android, we have the tools to actually capture screenshots from that one. And those screenshots are sent directly to Smartling, and we run optical character recognition on them to identify strings that we already have in the system. And this way, strings get contextualized. This is the same as you would upload the image as a file for particular existing content that you have. You can just take screenshots yourself and apply it to the content that is already ingested within the platform. You can also update to say, okay, well, this image doesn't represent my application anymore, so I want to update I want to upload a new image. You can do that, obviously. This context is not 100% covered. You know, it doesn't provide 100% coverage. The matching is it's probability model that actually may or may not match all the content. So the additional challenge here is to provide 100% coverage for such context by taking a particular screenshots of particular sizes, by trying to reduce or increase the sharpness of the images and so on. In the case of mobile applications, though, there is another way to do that. There is so-called mobile SDK that application developer can use to provide the Smartling with the context by not just sending the images or screenshots, but also sending the places, the spots of the string within the context. So pretty much application developer knows where the strings reside in the context, and it may send the coordinates right away. It may send coordinates along with the context and say, okay, I know the string resides here, so I know that the string has this string ID within the Smartling, and I want you to bind this string to this context at this position. So in this case, this context has 100% coverage, and it's very accurate because application developer knows exactly where the context is. The same for such tools as a Photoshop plugin or a Sketch plugin that work with images natively. So they obviously know where the content is, and they can provide all the coordinates and all the binding information. So we don't have to run OCR in this case. This is already provided by us, for us by the application developer. So the use case of Word document is pretty simple, actually. This is the primary context, and what it does is that the Microsoft Word document may have pretty complicated structure. As you know, it may have images, it may have references to different resources, and what's happening is that it is actually parsed and transformed to so-called wrapped HTML format. This is the enriched HTML format that contains the places of the strings within HTML. And when this context is shown in the CAT tool, it is a complete replica of your Word document, but is actually HTML. So CAT tool actually shows translations live, like in any other case. The only context that is not shown live is image context, obviously, but we are working on that to improve the experience, to overlay any any translated information onto the image. The next use case is application resources. So application resources are, as I mentioned, are technical file formats that are uploaded by application developers or customer who already started externalizing and localizing the content of, for example, web application. And this content exists without context for a long time, actually. And here we have a number of options. So we can use several tools that actually provide the context, but in this case, the context is usually matched against the content. And it's up to customer to actually identify what is their, well, it's not up to customer, it's actually up to customer service for us to identify the best approach for the customer to deliver the context. So we can use tools like JavaScript library, which I can briefly explain. This is the snippet of the JavaScript the customer may embed on their website. And what it does, it actually tracks the changes in the page, changes in the DOM model, and whatever user action is led to the change that resulted in a new text to be appearing, the content of the HTML page is captured and is sent to Smartling. Then it matched against the content, and such strings get contextualized. So what strings get contextualized in this case? What we try to do, we're trying to get this set of all strings within the project. So Smartling works with entities such as project, and when you embed the JavaScript library in your website, you actually tell it to which project to upload, to which project you want the context to be uploaded. So it's a very unique tool. It's pretty interesting because it has a number of advantages, and it's very easy to improve because we can have so-called content filtering on its side. For example, you want the sensitive content to be masked, or you want it to be deleted. So you can initialize the JavaScript library with a piece of JavaScript that actually removes the content prior it being uploaded to Smartling. As well as you can identify whether you want the associated resources to be uploaded along with the HTML. Say you have a private environment where you develop your application, and you don't want to expose. You're not ready to expose your public website, your production application to the users, but you want it to be already localized when it goes public. So what you do, you typically have a development environment where you capture the context while your application is evolving. So in this case, your environment is not available to Smartling services, so it cannot really get the resources from your public environment. So JavaScript library takes care of that, and it uploads all the associated resources like images, fonts, style files, along with the context. And this way, the context becomes, not ugly, like not bad as we've seen before. The context becomes good, and definitely helps in localization process. So the other tool is this one. Actually, I already mentioned that. It's a Chrome extension. So Chrome extension is unique in its own way because, as already mentioned, it bundles the content. It doesn't need to upload all the resources. It creates this monolith version of the HTML that it already includes all necessary information. But the downside of that is that mostly it's manual. You have to do something with your hands, which many customers don't like to do. They don't like to have a person sitting and clicking and capturing all the states of the application to provide the context for the strings that they haven't even seen. So in this case, the Chrome extension is something that is quite rarely used, but it's very good when you have to provide a very precise context, or you have to fix already captured context with this new one. You can override. You can definitely update the context that was captured by some other tool, some automated tool. Like JavaScript library may work in production environments, and your users can automate it for you. So users can open pop-ups, they can scroll, they can type something for the content to be revealed. They can open menus, they can click on menus, and all those transient states will be captured, and all the strings that appear in the process will be associated with such context. So the other thing is that once you upload the context, it becomes the HTML that is renderable in the browser, right? So if your application is JavaScript based, right? It's essentially rendered by a script, which is very popular now, or it's single page application. You don't have to go to different pages. You just have one page, but the content that you work with appears only when you do certain actions. So what to do with such context, right? So how it's going to render in CatTool. CatTool is a browser as well. And what we decided to use our our rendering engine. So prior context, prior to the state, when the context is shown to translators, we run it through rendering engine. So rendering engine ensures that the context looks exactly like in production environment, so as close as possible by running appropriate scripts or by getting appropriate resources, and also it creates a thumbnail. It creates a little screenshot of how context appears in the cat tool. It's a little image. It just shows whether you have context and how good it is and whether you need to change it. All right. So the next one is that's probably the last one too. So it's the most kind of sophisticated way that Smartling built for customers, but it's very simple to use by a customer because this is essentially a plugin based system that allows it to use a content management system that customer is already using by introducing the connectors that deal with both with content and the context. In this case, the context capture is completely managed by the connector itself, and depending on the CMS provider, the different strategy may be used because the different CMS has different content strategy as well. So the customer doesn't even have to think about that. And such context usually has 100% coverage, and all the resources associated with such HTML context are typically captured by the connector as well. So that was pretty much it. I just want to have a little bit. I came to a conclusion that the contextualization is possible. So if you're still translating without context, make sure you don't. Make sure you have context available for you. And as we already heard and seen, the human translation is definitely the future in the actual localization, in providing your brands with the content that resonates with the local auditorium, that is localized and adapted to a particular locale. So so if you have any questions, please. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Valentina. Thank you for the presentation. My question is a bit more general about Smartling. Am I right when I say that Smartling is, first of all, marketed to the content owners, like people who own the content? Is that correct, that they decide to use Smartly, not an LSP or a translator himself or herself?
That is mostly correct. Yes, Smartling started as a translation platform for enterprises, and Smartling has a lot of options to choosing either your own LSP or Smartling provided freelance translators, and or not freelance translators, but language services in general. It's a completely different topic actually. It's a very big part of Smartling that's being evolved, and actually language services is a subject of this year. Is a subject of this year Smartling product evolvement, and more effort is going to be concentrated on language services. And that's true. The content owners may definitely decide whether they want to use Smartling or not. That solely depends on negotiation process and content and context strategy for the customer. Me as developer, I have quite short, quite narrow perspective of what is happening with the LSP selection process. So as far as I know, typically there are two options: either Smartling provided translation services, like language services, or customer can choose their own. And in this case, LSP is forced to use Smartling. If that answers your question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Smartling is one of those platforms. When a job arrives from some client, and it's going to be an in-house, his provided working environment. For some clients, I think oh, I'm gonna have to work in that tool again. SmartLink is not one of those tools. I enjoy working in it.
Oh,
I
thanks
love
God.
the context feature. It's really comfortable to use. My question is are there plans for an app, not just a browser-based version? Because browser versions have their limitations in terms of hotkeys. I think SmartLink prefers Chrome, as far as I remember. That's why I have Chrome on my laptop rather than Firefox. I don't think Firefox is completely supported because it tells me to switch to Chrome every time I open a job in SmartLink.
Okay.
Are there plans for an app?
So that's a good question. SmartLink's been back and forth with trying to understand the real need for building hosted application, but it's still as far as I know, SmartLink still wants to be a cloud-based TMS, and the implications of that is that most of the tools, pretty much all the tools except connectors, are in the cloud. They are browser-based. There is some product initiative that's going on, that's been going on for a couple of quarters, I believe, to be honest. That's tries to package the CAT tool into an application using tools like Electron, for example. That something that you can use in offline mode. There are also some offline features that SmartLink supports, like offline workflow steps, offline translation. For example, you can use CAT tool in offline mode, and then once you connect it to internet, you can publish all your translations or whatever you've done. For example, you are on the train, there is no internet, you can still use a browser to use the CAT tool. It loads all the resources, caches on your machine, and works faster in most of the cases. I'm actually not sure about whether it's supported solely by Chrome. It's definitely not supported by IE, like Internet Explorer. That's definitely, I know. As far as Firefox goes, I think it's supposed to be supported. If there are some parts of interface that not supported, probably it just they're not completed yet. They might be not just be ready for Firefox. That's why we have temporary so-called A/B testing or split testing or incremental feature reveal that would actually force you, for example, to use Chrome for a while until developers work on the Firefox support. So, and I understand that a lot of translators in the industry, a lot of translation experts used to use desktop software, and something like cloud TMS is not usually a choice. And what we've done for that is that there is a number of schemes, number of key bindings that we introduced to the CAT tool that allow you to mimic work in MemoQ, for example, or in Trados, or in other tools. So, and the beauty of the cloud TMS is you can evolve it incrementally in very quick iterations. So if you miss some key binding, you can just request it. There is so-called NPS initiative that we've been running for a year already, which calculates Net Promoter Score for the application, and it calculates number of positives like detractors and passives, to identify the overall score for the application by different roles of the of the customers. For example, if you're a translator, you can say I hate this thing or I love this thing, and it will be recorded as a positive or negative Net Promoter Score. So based on that, the number of features being developed to alleviate the experience with the platform from both performance standpoint and functionality standpoint. And you cannot really do that much if you have a desktop version. You have to continuously install new update. You have to take care of them. You have to make sure you do that when you're notified. But every time you log into SmartLink system, you have a newest version essentially. So that's one of the motivations why the SmartLink is kept in the cloud. It has to evolve very quickly.
Hi, my name is Joseph.
Hi.
I'm from Wix company.
Okay.
I I have a question about the Chrome extension that helps you to extract the HTML stuff and send it to SmartLink.
Yep.
But basically, it doesn't do the reverse process of importing.
It is not.
It is not. So
No.
you will virtually need to then to do it manually. Yeah. When
It does not. It does not provide translated. It does not publish translated content back to the website.
back to the website.
All it does, it captures the context.
Yeah,
Something-
and then you get it from SmartLink, the translated file. You download it, and then you do whatever you need to do with inside your system. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You make sure. So the contextualization is essentially providing tools for translators to get a better translation, to get the highest translation quality. These particular context tools, except connectors, work exclusively with the context. So they don't deal with the content transfer between your system and SmartLink. Connectors do both, though.
Okay.
They do both. They actually push back the translated content back into the CMS.
But virtually, you can create new connectors for different applications or yeah.
Absolutely. And also as I mentioned, customer may create their own connector.
Okay.
Yeah, they can create their own client system that would be able to talk to SmartLink through the API. And SmartLink API is very extensive, and you can build your product around string management. You can build your product around workflow management. You can build your product that shows reports, and you can build your product for translators that actually pulls the string and pushes the translated content back, as well as providing them with the context. You can do all of that. It's interesting that the customers, we don't know yet there is a customer that builds such extensive integration. There are parts of integration the customers build, definitely, that help them to work with the content. There's a big customer that I cannot name, but they is so big that SmartLink is just a little piece in their workflow system, that delivers the content, localized content to their customers, to their clients. So, and they use API directly. They build the very extensive client system. We've been going to them. They've been coming to us to actually reveal all the details that we can do, all the details that our API provides. We iterated on data formats, on the API limits and other things, but they build their own integration around job management, content management, and workflow management.
Yeah, thank you.
It's possible. Yeah, sure. Thank you. All right. No more question? Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for patience.